gonna throw. One-on-one, Davis has it. Touchdown! Carolina wins! Carolina is the Coastal Division champion!
Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go, man there.
Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina!
The pistol, Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson, he tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted! Surratt intercepts it! Holy cow, Carolina's gonna win! And off to Javonte Williams again, pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back, pressure coming, Aguilar floats it up, incomplete! No flags! Head on back up the mountain! Carolina wins it in double overtime! Loftus, out of the shotgun, throws to the end zone, incomplete! Incomplete! The bell belongs to us! Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime!
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast coming at you guys on a Sunday night. And we are back to talk about the first day of camp. The Tar Heels underway. Fall camp has officially begun as of Saturday. 2 days in now, but we're going to talk about some of the takeaways from the first day of camp, from some of the reports that were coming out from Inside Carolina, Tar Heel Illustrated, anybody that was in attendance yesterday. There were plenty of things to take away from that. So we'll discuss some of those and then move on to talk about the commitment of a guy in the 2027 class very briefly. And then after that, we will, of course, go into the tight ends for this year's 2025 roster as Carolina gets prepared for the season. We are now under a month away from the start of the season. And, of course, as you guys notice, this is the 600th edition of the podcast. So we have been doing this for a long time now. So congratulations to all of you who have been sticking with us through these 600 episodes. We really appreciate it and are glad that you have been along for this amazing ride. For those who have jumped on in between, it's great to have you too. And we're hoping that we're going to get some new listeners here tonight on the 600th edition of the show. But as I mentioned, we're going to start by talking about the biggest takeaways from camp. And the first one, I think, was very significant because, you know, you saw a lot of talk in the press conferences about it. You saw a lot of talk when the team was on the field about it. But that was Max Johnson returning to the practice field in full and taking some of the first team snaps during individual drills. You know, some people are reading into that probably more than you should. I think, you know, this is going to be a quarterback battle between him and Gio Lopez. I think that certainly is something that's going on right now, but I think it's mainly because they just don't want to necessarily hand over the job to a guy in Gio Lopez who has yet to take a snap in practice as of Saturday morning until he got out there. So I think that's part of the reason why. I think that's something that you know, a lot of people are reading into, but I think it's just amazing that he is back out there. We were told by so many different people that there was a good chance that he would not be back out there. We did not know how serious this injury actually was. I mean, he sort of detailed it when he spoke to the media after the practice was over, that he had to have 5 surgeries on his leg. And actually, we was thinking at one point that he was going to end up losing his right leg after the injury that he suffered. So for him to be out there back on the field and to be going through some of those first team drills, I think is really a great moment for Tar Heel football and for Max Johnson.
Yeah, I think It's a great testimony of who he is as a player and as a person, right? Because how many people would, after 5 injuries and with amputation, very much a possibility, still put in the work that is required to get back to the point where you're on a practice field taking first team snaps. And I think that's the one thing you'll like about this quarterback room, whether Max Johnson ends up being the guy or not. I still think when this is all said and done, Gio Lopez will emerge as Carolina's starter. But you look at the character that's in that room, and you feel like this position is in a really good spot because you just got really good character guys in that locker room. And Max Johnson, I think, is the ultimate test to that. I mean, this was a guy that, I think we got to remember, came to Carolina to play for Mack Brown, gets injured in the first half of his first game as a Tar Heel. The season goes sideways, a month later. Mack Brown ultimately gets fired. Carolina goes in a different direction, and he stayed here. And he stayed here while, Bill Belichick, aggressively pursued Bryce Baker in the recruiting cycle. And he stayed here even after Gio Lopez was paid, roughly $2 million to come play quarterback here, which tells you what Max Johnson thinks of Carolina as a football program, as a university. And I think he'll be a guy that embodies that it's not a 4-year decision, it's a 40-year decision. And even though he was a 2-time transfer upon arriving in Chapel Hill, he has all the makeups and what you want in a Carolina football player. And so just happy for Max to see him back on the field. It's a great story of inspiration and perseverance. And I mean, who knows? We kind of counted him out when he got injured. I guess it's fair to say you can't count him out as him emerging as Carolina's maybe starting quarterback with all the hell he's been through. This is a kid that's motivated to get back on that playing field. And so we'll see how this battle emerges. But nonetheless, he's already a winner in my book, overcoming 5 surgeries and getting back on the field.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the best way to look at it, that he's already a guy who's winning for Carolina and by just even being out there. But I think you're right. I think there is a chance that he actually competes for this starting job. And I think it all goes back to what we talked about when we previewed the quarterbacks. It's that experience that he has in the SEC. And he wasn't, the winningest quarterback in the SEC. He's not a guy that's going to appear on any Heisman list, but he was a guy that did a really good job of taking care of the football, really good touchdown interception ratio, was able to move his team up and down the field consistently at times at both LSU and Texas A&M. And I think, if he was given the keys to the offense and it was really built around him, I think this offense would probably be one that suits him a little bit better than just about any other offense that he's been in. So we'll have to see. I don't know if it's legit that he's going to have a shot to win this starting quarterback job, or if this really is just Gio Lopez has to show us a little bit before we can really turn it over to him. But we'll see, over the next few weeks of camp, what the updates are and whether or not he is a serious contender for that job. Now, the one thing I can say is based off of some of the notes from around practice, it seems like this is a 2-quarterback battle. We thought maybe Bryce Baker was going to be involved in this battle after what we saw from him in the spring. He, of course, I think, in my opinion, was the better of the 2 quarterbacks, at least from what I saw in the Practice Like a Pro event. But it seems like some of the reports that came out yesterday was that he was seems to be struggling with some of the elements of the offense. And if that's the case, I think this probably is a 2-man race between Gio Lopez and Max Johnson, which isn't all that shocking considering what we had been talking about when we were talking about the quarterback position earlier on this offseason.
No, and it's probably maybe best case scenario for a guy like Bryce Baker, maybe take some pressure off of him, let him get acclimated to life, as a college student, get acclimated to what Bill Belichick and what Freddie Kitchens want and demands out of the way they want their quarterback to handle practice and everything like that. I think with the way that he felt about Carolina upon his commitment, they probably don't feel necessarily the pressure to make him start right away. And maybe this is a guy that's still the future of that quarterback room. for years to come. And look, I kind of thought, just given the talent that he possessed, that I thought maybe he would emerge as a legitimate threat to be Carolina's starting quarterback to Gio Lopez. And we still got a long way to go. There've only been 2 days of camp. I find that hard to see happen now. I think this is going to be a competition between Gio Lopez and Max Johnson. And as long as, I think, these decisions, not to say that they were not taken as seriously or as calculated under Mac Brown when he had to endure quarterback battles. But I mean, with Belichick that he is going to do what's best for the team first. It's all about the team, all about the team, all about the team. Factor in how short of a window he has to make this a success story. It's why I think he looks at what's on the table here in year one and looks at that schedule and realizes, man, there's a lot of games here that if we get really good quarterback play, we can win those games. It's probably a big reason why they went and got Gio Lopez in the portal anyway. And so I just guess I want to caution people, don't overreact. Yes, there was a lot of hype around Bryce Baker when he committed, and I was the one leading the charge, and I thought he would be Carolina's starter, and him and Bill Belichick would build this thing from the ground up. But if he's still the future of this room, I think that's a really good thing for Carolina moving forward, life after Gio Lopez and life after Max Johnson. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. But I don't view it a negative that Bryce Baker on the surface doesn't appear to be a factor in this year's quarterback battle.
Yeah, I mean, it's more the processing stuff. It feels like he holds the ball a little too long and stuff like that. I think that's really the thing that you got to get out of his system. And it's going to take time. I mean, we saw it, with a guy like Sam Howell. He had those same issues at times during his career. Now, he was just such a playmaker, and the way that he was built, I think, allowed him to succeed and get himself out of trouble at times. The other thing was, you go back to him in 2019 and you look at that quarterback room that they were dealing with then. They didn't have a veteran option that they could have gone to, not one that was consistent enough for Carolina to really trust. And so I think that was the reason why he won that job back then. I think we all kind of thought that maybe Bryce Baker would give you some similar feels to that. Very accurate passer and everything like that, but it's just about getting up to the speed of the college game. It may have taken him just a little bit of time, and to me, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You want to get it right with him because you don't want to throw him out there too early and get him into a point where he's making a lot of mistakes, and that sort of ruins the trajectory of his career when you've got guys like Gio Lopez, like Max Johnson, who can sort of ease him in and allow him to develop as a quarterback and eventually become the starter for Carolina down the road. Now, I mean, he's going to have, it's going to be tough for him because he's got a guy in the 2026 class in Travis Burgess that's incredibly talented too. So it's not going to be easy for him to be able to win the starting job, but still, I think he's in a spot where he's going to be able to be developed by this staff. And that really is ultimately what you want for him, because if he's going to be at his best, it's going to take a little bit of time. And for now, yeah, it comes down to Gio Lopez and Max Johnson. And look, you've got a guy that's won at the SEC level, has done everything that he's needed to do there, and now is coming down to the ACC level. Wasn't great at the start of last year, but maybe this offense fits him a little bit better. And then you've got a guy in Gio Lopez who is really good at the group of five level, has a ton of upside. Reminds you, in the way that he's built and the way that he plays of Sam Howell. Maybe that's, something that this staff really loves and is going to value. So we'll see where this quarterback battle goes. I'm still with you. To me, you don't bring your guy Gio Lopez to ACC Media Days and then don't start that guy. I would find it really hard to believe, but you never really do know, because this comes down to competing for the starting job. And that was one of the other things that Bill Belichick talked about yesterday that I thought was really interesting and really felt like a different message from what was actually seen on the field the last few years. Not going to say that Mac Brown didn't tell you that guys were going to have to compete for jobs. He told you that all the time. He told you that we were going to make sure that guys were competing out there and earning everything. Well, when it came to actually going on the field on game day, one of the situations that you always like to reference is the Des Evans situation in the game against North Carolina Central, where he picks up multiple personal foul penalties and stays in the game for Carolina. And I get it. He was off to a really good start in that game, but it shouldn't matter. When you're making mistakes like that, you've got to be willing to turn to the depth on your roster. And we heard yesterday, Bill Belichick talk about earning it, and we also heard him talk about the depth of this roster and how even though they don't have the 105 scholarship guys, he loved the question from, I believe it was Aaron Beard, who said right out, what about this roster, with the guys that are deeper on the depth chart and stuff like that? What do you expect from those guys? And he said that he expects those guys to be ready to play because we're going to need them at some point this season. So I think this is definitely one of those situations where he means what he's saying. He is one of those guys that's not selling you a bill of goods. When it comes to this coming season, we are going to see a guy that's going to make sure that things are done right, or he's going to turn to other guys on this roster.
I think he's going to maximize as much of his depth as he can and do a much better job than what Mack Brown did, what Larry, pretty much any coach, quite frankly, we've ever seen. Because I think every player will be as prepared to play and make an impact as possible. And a lot of that is just because that's not even as much of a requirement as it is just a demand of playing for Bill Belichick. You've got to be prepared to play. And if you're not, they'll find someone else to do it. Mack Brown would get very lenient with guys when they made mental errors. That's not something that's going to fly for Belichick. I think it's something that I look forward to watching this team develop into, is that I think that this is going to be a disciplined football team, because I think he'll do a much better job communicating and really outlining how thin the margins are. And it's not just for Carolina. This for a lot of teams that are in Carolina's position, to where if you eliminate penalties, just what it does in terms of field position and how it changes the outcomes of football games. And so I think it's something that they know that they don't have the 105 scholarship players that you're allotted to have, but I think they'll maximize their depth in ways that we haven't been able to do in years past. They'll maximize the time in practice. I think they'll be a lot more aware of rotating guys in and out of games. Now that's why it's important against, the likes of Charlotte and Richmond, that you can maybe get those games over earlier rather than later, so you can maybe get some guys some valuable time on the playing field. But I do think that, that's something that he means, and you saw him appreciate the question. And that's the message to those guys in that locker room. Even though you're not a starter, or even though you're maybe not on the two deep, we need you to help us win. We need you to help us in practice. We need you to be prepared to play on Saturdays. And so there's always been a player or two during Belichick's time in the pros that comes out of nowhere and is a productive player. I don't think that's going to change now that he's in college. There's probably a guy on this roster that we're sitting here today and we're not spending a whole lot of time talking about, but by the time we get to mid-October, maybe early November, he'll be a difference maker on this team, and we'll be able to really point at Bill Belichick as the reason why, making sure that player was ready to be the player that this team needs him to be.
Yeah, and this is the time to be able to do that. That's why I think the message is that you need to be preparing every day. Everybody needs to be going 100% in practice, because we got to find the guys that are ready to play this year, because we're going to be rotating a lot of guys. You mentioned it. I mean, even in spots like the interior defensive line, where Carolina doesn't necessarily have as much depth, they're going to rotate there because they're going to want to keep guys fresh throughout the year. And it really is on these guys to just step up. But the biggest thing is that the bench is finally going to be a motivator here. If you're making mistakes, it feels like this staff is going to say, hey, we're going to sit you down. we need you to learn from this, and we're going to need you again at some point, either in this game or we're going to need you at some point later in the season. But you've got to learn from this. We can't just let you keep making these mistakes over and over again. And that was what we saw with Mack Brown so many times, was that the guys were committing the same mistakes repeatedly and nothing was being done about it. This year, look, even if we're putting in a lesser player, at least he's a guy that's not getting us killed with penalties and stuff like that, or he's not getting us killed with blown coverages, missed assignments, whatever you're looking for at a certain position. And I think that's something that is going to be a lot different than what we saw under Mack Brown, and a breath of fresh air, frankly, under Bill Belichick. You know, one area where we could see a lot of guys that are interchanging, coming in and out of the game, is along the offensive line. And the first team offensive line yesterday, according to some of the reporters that were out there, you got Trevion Green at left tackle, which is different from the spring where he was over at right tackle. So he is going to stay on that front side for these quarterbacks. The good news is that for Gio Lopez, for Max Brown, both guys are left-handed, so you don't have to do a lot of maneuvering. You don't have to change things up with whoever is in there at quarterback. But yeah, it looks like Trevion Green at left tackle, Aiden Banfield at left guard, Christo Kelly at center, Austin Blaske at right guard, and Miles McVay protecting the blind side at right tackle, moving over from left tackle when he protected the blind side for Carolina back in the spring. And so one thing that I think is worth noting here is that Christo Kelly is in the starting lineup. Seems like that's pretty much going to happen. I think there was still some wonder as to whether or not Austin Blaske might slide back in there. Maybe you would have Daniel King next to him, the right guard transfer from Troy, who was very successful at Troy. But now, you know, it looks like he's a guy that's not necessarily in that starting group. Now, again, that's the first day of camp. It was them going through position drills. They did not get to watch 7-on-7 or 11-on-11. So, you know, there are some takeaways from certain areas that, you know, might be a little bit different if you actually got to watch those team drills. But it does seem interesting that that was the first group that they were rolling with, and that the Holy Cross transfer is in there at center and seems to be a guy that has gained the trust of this staff.
Yep, and I think this is the position group among the offensive line, or I guess among the offense. And, of course, we still got to do that position preview. That I think it's going to be the most intriguing, most interesting, see how it all plays out with just all the turnover we saw at that position. You know, you saw a lot of guys leave. You saw a lot of guys come in. And the national pundits, you have some guys that are very, very high on the remade offensive line. Phil Steele is one of them. And you've got some guys that look at them bringing in a guy from Holy Cross, then bringing in a guy from Troy, and really wondering, will those guys hold up? Will those guys stack up you know, at the ACC level? Of course, you know, we're very familiar last year with Banfield and Blaske. Like to see both of those two guys right now maybe projected to be starters. You mentioned the flip of Trevion Green from the right side to the left side, which means he's no longer protecting your blind side, which I guess we feel a lot better about, because Carolina is all but going to be starting a left-handed quarterback. So I think this is the maybe outside of what we hear about the quarterback spot. I think this is the position among the offensive side of the ball that I'm most interested to hear if we hear from Belichick again during fall camp, what it looks like, what it sounds like. Because, you know, we're not used to, or we are used to hearing Mack Brown talk about and stress the importance of, you know, getting quality depth built among that group, and becoming a much better group in terms of just physicality, limiting penalties, so on and so forth. But that was a group that in the last 2 years we saw play really, really well in September. But by the back end of the year was the biggest reason why the offense was sputtering. And so I think it's a big reason why Belichick, Michael Lombardi shipped some guys out. I think they are kind of aware around the narrative around Carolina up front. I think it's one thing they're kind of set out to change. And every time you hear Lombardi talk or Belichick, it's all about being physical at the point of attack. That, of course, starts up front in the trenches. And so, with all the turnover there, you've got plenty of different options to pick from to find your best five and build legitimate depth. And, what we saw and what was reported from the first practice yesterday is you've got some holdovers from last year back in that offensive line, but there are some transfers, albeit from the group of five or FCS level. They're going to play a big role in this team in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, Christo Kelly, is a guy that I knew had gained the trust of this staff when he spoke to the media back in June. I think that was clear, and it made you think that he was going to be one of the guys that was a starter here. That one, look, it is what it is. We'll see what he does early in the year. If he struggles that much, they can always move Austin Blaske back there. And you do have Daniel King, a guy that I really like a lot and think is capable of starting along this offensive front. Probably the group of five transfer that I feel the best about out of the group that they have. When you look at the concern with this group, maybe there are some people that are still concerned with Aiden Banfield. I'm not, because I thought what he did in his freshman season, I mean, he had some inconsistencies. There's no doubt about that. But it's exactly what I just said. He was a freshman, and he was still able to hold up as a starter, really looked pretty good at certain times in the run game. I think got better as the season went along in pass protection. I think he's only going to continue to get better. And there are guys here that, hey, if there are some growing pains again this year, you can rotate in that can help you out there. The tackle spots are really where you're wondering, is this group good enough? Because Trevion Green last year gave up a ton of pressures, gave up a ton of sacks while protecting the front side. He's going to be protecting that front side again this year. And even though he's switching over to the other side, I mean, even that, brings about some questions of whether or not he's going to be able to handle playing on the left side. He struggled on the right side. Maybe the left side is his stronger side, and maybe he'll actually end up being more successful, but we'll have to wait and see. And then with Miles McVay, there were some times in that game, in that practice, like a pro event rather, where he struggled, and I thought he was getting beat around the outside. Now maybe some of these edge rushers for Carolina really are going to be that good this year, but that was before they got their starter in Smith Vilbert. That was before it was before Bo Atkinson ends up transferring, but it looked like Bo Atkinson was playing mostly on that right side or matching up with the right tackle in Trevion Green and giving him some problems in that game. I do think that there are going to be still some questions about this offensive tackle position going into the season. You do have Will Osteen that you brought in from Louisiana as well. That's going to factor in here at this position at some point. It seems like, yesterday, of course, not going to roll him out there. This staff, again, saying you've got to earn it. So for him, it's going to be up to him to earn it in these practices if he's going to take over one of those starting roles, even though his stats would tell you that he should probably be one of the starters for Carolina. We'll see, though. I think it's going to be really interesting, and I hope that Carolina can find a combination along this offensive front that we can trust to play the majority of the snaps. Yes, there's going to be some rotation this year, and I think that's something that we can expect a little bit more of, and I'm okay with that. But I want a five that I can trust to go out there and play these crucial drives for Carolina, and the hope is that they are on their way to finding that. So that's your look at the first day of camp. We're not going to spend too much more time. One of the other interesting things that was noted that I put on here to point out was a lot of under center play. Some of the snaps that they were taking, the majority of them were under center, if not all of them were under center. But that was, again, during just one portion of practice. So we don't know what exactly it looked like once they got into team drills. If you go back to the spring and you go back to that practice like a pro event, they did a decent job of mixing it up. There was some under center play, but still a lot of shotgun play. So I expect that you're going to see something similar to what you saw in the spring, although it really just depends, I think, on which quarterback is in there, how much they will do certain things. All right, let's move on and talk really quickly about the commitment in the 2027 class. This happened earlier today. Not going to spend too much time on this because we're going to be back tomorrow night, me and Zach Hubbard, talking about this commitment specifically. We will touch on the commitments from the other day, the completed flips of Viliami Moala, as well as Carson Sneed. We'll touch on both of those guys, but we will be focused a lot on 2027 running back, four-star running back Amir Brown, who committed on Sunday afternoon. The number 303 overall prospect, number 20 running back in the 2027 class, according to 24/7 Sports composite rankings. He is an in-state prospect, comes from Rolesville High School in Roseville, North Carolina. Of course, should be familiar with that with the 2026 class, where you've got both Zavian Griffin-Haynes and Jaden Griffin-Haynes that are committed to the class for Carolina. Last year, finished with 624 yards and 13 touchdowns on the ground, 297 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns through the air. He is a guy that stands at 5'11", 205 pounds, so a little bit smaller, but really I like everything about his game. Incredible speed, a guy who, even though he is small, runs with a nice edge. Good north-south mentality, focused on getting the ball up the field as opposed to taking it to the boundaries, even though he is a guy that has really good speed. I thought really good as a receiver out of the backfield. Can do some things a little more complicated than just those short routes that you can use as a dump down option. Really did run some more complex routes down the field, and was able to have some decent success at that. And then when it comes to pass protection, I thought he was pretty promising in that area as well. So a lot to like about him. Like I said, tomorrow night we will be breaking him down a little bit more. And then at the end of the episode tomorrow night, make sure that you guys stick around, because we will be talking with Trayshawn Ruffin, the Tar Heels 2026 four-star defensive tackle target, or four-star defensive tackle commit, excuse me. And we'll be discussing so far, his the reason that he committed to Carolina. When I talked to him earlier in the week, it was on Friday. It was when he got his official offer, so we'll talk a little bit about that. His father's involvement in his recruitment, which I thought was really cool. And then he'll talk about some of the guys that just recently committed to the 2026 class and why he's so involved as a recruiter for Carolina. So make sure you stick around and catch all of that. All right, now let's move on to our position preview for this evening. That would be the tight ends. And this is a group this year that I think a lot of people are wondering about, because there isn't really a whole lot that's known about this group. You lose both Bryson Nesbitt and John Copenhaver from last year. Those were guys that were mainstays at the position for each of the last 2 years. You could go back even further than that with the impacts that were felt from them. And now you're turning to Jake Johnson, who is going to be the guy that is the lone scholarship holdover guy from last year's team. There are still a couple of guys that were walk-ons on last year's teams that are on scholarship now, but this is the only guy that is going to be a scholarship player that is going to carry over. And he played a little bit last year for Carolina at the end of the year. Didn't really do a whole lot. Was, used primarily as a blocker. Did not have many catches for Carolina last year, but back at Texas A&M was a very impactful player as a sophomore, or as a redshirt freshman, when he caught 24 passes for 235 yards and 4 touchdowns. Carolina needs him to turn back the clock a little bit and become that type of player for Carolina this year, because they need someone to step up at that tight end spot. And the rest of the guys in this room are really guys that are coming from other schools where they didn't necessarily have even that type of production that we're seeing from a guy like Jake Johnson.
Yeah, the arrival of Bill Belichick feels like it's 1 year too late, just in terms of utilizing the tight ends. This is something that, from Phil Longo to Chip Lindsey, man, I begged for, I demanded, and I complained a lot about, because there was a lot of talent in that room that I thought they never got the full potential out of that, out of those guys. And now you're in a situation where both those guys are gone. You're going into a year where you've got yet another quarterback battle, and you don't have a known commodity at that safety valve position in terms of production while wearing a UNC uniform. You know that Jake Johnson can be a productive player. You saw it at Texas A&M. Don't know what led to the lack of production or just the lack of using him as a receiver last year. Did not make a whole lot of sense. And I think it's something where it does make it a lot harder to kind of project him moving forward. Just what kind of player is he? Is he going to be a guy that we could count to catch, anywhere from 30 to 35 passes, or Belichick, Freddie Kitchens, are they going to use him primarily as a blocker? So I think this is a group, when you look at, the question marks that exist at wide receiver. We're confident in the running back room's ability because we're big fans of Davian Goss. But I do think not knowing what the production from this position group looks like does make it hard to kind of decipher kind of what this Carolina offense can and will be. With that being said, I do think it'll be featured more. Just when you look at the way Belichick's offenses kind of molded there when he was in New England. Now, granted, he had a Hall of Famer in Rob Gronkowski to kind of highlight and utilize, but the back half of that New England dynasty, you saw the tight end position really become a bigger part of what the Patriots did offensively. And so I wonder how much of that will carry over into the college game and what he does with Freddie Kitchens. And we'll see if maybe they can find a way to, tap into some of the potential that exists in that room, because I don't think the room necessarily lacks for talent. We just haven't seen a lot of a production, whether it's in Chapel Hill or some of the transfers to other previous stops.
Yeah, I mean, with Jake Johnson, I think the weird thing about him was he played 202 snaps last year for Carolina. Only 44 of them were passing snaps. So it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that a guy that comes from Texas A&M, where he played 448 snaps and 248 of those were passing downs, it makes sense why he was so successful there and wasn't as successful here. I mean, he had 2 catches for 21 yards the whole season last year. And remember that he was a guy that was out there a pretty decent amount after the injury to Bryson Nesbitt. He had to take over. Carolina still wanted to run 2 tight end sets. Copenhagen was, of course, a guy that was getting the majority of the targets, but you felt like he would be a little bit more involved. They weren't even putting him out there on most of those passing downs. I think this year you're going to see it be a little bit different. You're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets where Carolina is going to be throwing the football. And that's good news for Jake Johnson. He's expected to be the starter anyway, so even if they're just running 1 tight end, it is what it is. But it's good news for some of the other guys on the roster as well. I just want Jake Johnson to be a guy that can be relied upon. And if he can even recreate what he did at Texas A&M, I think that's good enough. I mean, 24 catches, 235 yards, and 4 touchdowns, like I mentioned, those are healthy numbers, especially the touchdown number. I mean, once every 6 catches, he's hauling in a touchdown. That's something that you can get behind from a tight end perspective. We don't think that this room has to be awesome because we think this wide receiver room is going to be really good, but you like to have somebody that is more than just a dump down threat every so often. And even that wasn't what he was a year ago, but you'd like to have somebody that can sort of attack the middle of the field a little bit for you. I don't know if that's necessarily what Jake Johnson is going to specify in. I think he's got that ability to be able to do that, but we'll just have to wait and see on that front. When you look at the rest of the room, there is one guy that I think if you go off of his high school film, you could say, he is a guy that did that a lot at the high school level. That's Connor Cox out of South Carolina. And, he didn't play much at South Carolina, really played sparingly. But I do think that this was a case of a guy who was early in his career. I mean, just 1 catch for 9 yards. It was a touchdown. But this is a guy that I think now is in a system that's going to allow him to play a little bit more. And, you look at him, I mean, he brings some physicality as a run blocker. Some of the signs are there, but I definitely think he is more of the receiving tight end. So if you're looking at him and saying that this is a guy that you're expecting to really be the focus in the passing game, allow Jake Johnson to continue to improve as a blocker, and that's really where he ends up shining, well, then this is going to be the guy that I think has to step up at the position and really take a step forward this year. I think this is the guy based off of what we've seen. He was here in the spring. The other guys that are going to be factoring in here at the tight end position were not. I think this is probably the guy that is next in line and probably is the best bet to be that second tight end for Carolina this year.
Yeah, and if you remember, there was, I think, some pretty good excitement around him coming to Carolina. And there was some South Carolina people that were kind of upset that, he left the program and went to go play for Bill Belichick. I think he was the first guy that I kind of identified of the revamp within the new look room and say he might be a guy that is really poised to take the next step just from what, from his body type with the kind of the way that he plays. He feels like the guy that is poised to really take a step forward and be a difference maker for Carolina. Trying to figure out what production looks like. It's really kind of hard to gauge that. And it's going to be really hard to gauge that for this room until we really find out how pivotal of a role the tight end will play in the offense. But I do think he's the best candidate on the roster, as you mentioned, to where if they're looking to keep Jake Johnson as a primary blocking tight end, which is something that I don't know if I necessarily agree with, but right. Who am I to argue? But if that's the role that they want to use him as, and they're trying to identify, develop a pass-catching tight end, I do think Connor Cox is the guy best poised to be that. It's just really hard to kind of gauge, what would you consider quality production out of that position as of this moment. So I'm trying to think back, because I watched all of Belichick's presser from Saturday. I don't remember if there was a question that was specifically asked about the tight end. If he gets behind the microphone again, I'd like to hear a question or two asked because, this is a room that there's just a lot of unknown. And I'd like to maybe know if Connor Cox is maybe a guy that when we show up to that season opener against TCU, I can maybe expect him to make a big play or two in the passing game.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I mean, we've got all these different position groups that we want to ask about. I mean, so far we've talked about the offensive line, which we want to ask about. We've talked about the tight ends, which we want to ask about. We, of course, want to ask about quarterback, which we talked about on this edition of the podcast. So I think that's the thing, right? We're not getting answers. And that's what's so tough about doing these previews this offseason as opposed to last offseason. Last offseason, we would have known how many catches in camp Connor Cox had. We would have known, the blood type of Jordan Owens, who they were getting out of the transfer portal, because that was just Mack Brown, right? Mack Brown told you everything that you needed to know about these guys, where it felt like you were actually a part of the team. You didn't even have to watch practice, and it felt like you knew about these guys. This year, it's just so different, and that's why I think it feels so wide open. It feels like there's opportunities here for everyone, and that's the same thing at the tight end position. You look at the two guys that come in the transfer portal that were a part of the spring portal window. That would be Oklahoma State transfer Jordan Owens, who transferred to Oklahoma State back in December before entering the portal once again in the spring. He was at Central Arkansas, where he saw action in 32 games and caught 29 passes for 248 yards and 7 touchdowns. That's in his entire career. So that's the thing for me that's a little bit tough about him. This past season as a junior, he caught 19 passes for 166 yards and 2 touchdowns. So again, there's a lot of things I think to like about him. Really the build. that he brings to the table. He does have, the most experience out of anybody in this room besides Jake Johnson. So I think that's certainly something. And I mean, the fact that he's played in 32 games, he technically has even more experience there. But you look at him, I mean, he's a guy that I think you're hoping's coming in and is going to be more of a blocker for you. This past year, played 519 snaps for Central Arkansas. 280 of them were in run blocking situations. And I mean, he graded out solidly, nothing great, but I think certainly something that you can like about what he did. He also had 84 pass block snaps and graded out incredibly well in that area. So maybe that's an area that you can utilize him as well. An extra offensive lineman in there for you at 6'6", 255 pounds. So again, they're looking for some of these bigger tight ends that are going to be able to help them, I think, as blockers. But you also need guys that can catch the football. And that's what Shamar Easter did at the high school level. Now, don't get it wrong. Shamar Easter is built as well, 6'5", 228 pounds, but a little more athletic. You go back and look at him. His senior year in high school, only caught 15 passes for 116 yards, but was also used as a running back where he ran for 116 yards and a touchdown on 6 carries. The year prior as a junior, though, that's where he really shined, and that's where I think a lot of people are looking at him. And when he came out of high school, he was a 4-star prospect, just like Connor Cox, because he had 30 receptions for 519 yards and 5 touchdowns. You're hoping that that's the type of guy that you can get for this year in that tight end room. I think these are 2 very interesting guys, but they're guys that we just really don't know that much about because one of them never really played in Easter at Arkansas, and the other one played a lot but really didn't contribute a ton in the receiving game. So it leaves you kind of wondering what exactly he's going to bring to the table.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the best example as to why there's just so much unknown at this room is you have a guy that, whether it was Owens who, as you mentioned, maybe is the most productive outside of Jake Johnson, but that production totals up. I'm looking at 27 catches total according to ESPN stats.
Yeah.
You have with Shamar Easter, a guy that was very productive at the high school level, a 4-star prospect. So, there's talent there, but you haven't seen it on the field in college yet. And so it kind of feels like this is maybe going to be a room as much as maybe any room on the offensive side of the football that I think the longer Belichick stays, let's say Belichick coaches 3-4 years, I think this room will continue to grow and look different because I think what you can really look at from right now, year one, their goal was to get as many big-bodied physical tight ends on this roster.
Yeah,
which leads you to believe that there will be more factors in blocking, which I'm not going to be upset about that. Like, there's nothing wrong with having extra blockers, especially given the way Carolina's offensive line has struggled at different times, even though this line is revamped. I'm not against that. It just, when you do see some of the best offenses, whether at the college or the NFL level, they do have a tight end that is a mismatch problem. And Belichick knows that as well as anybody. I don't know if that guy right now is necessarily on this roster, which makes you believe this is going to be a committee approach where they're going to maybe count on all 3 to 4 guys to produce, but it also will be a position group that I think will fluctuate. And, we could see a different starting tight end every other week, depending on what that guy does, in the game or in the week leading up to practice. And so, it's why I said when we started out with this position group, with this preview, I think it's one of the more interesting and intriguing things to see kind of how it develops early on in the season and as the season moves along, because with all the different question marks that do exist on the offensive side of the football, you're breaking in a new starting quarterback. The wide receiver room is one that we believe in, but you've got to see production from there. You'd like to have known commodities in the tight end room. That's not the reality of the situation, but it does open up the door for someone to emerge. It's just really all about who's going to be that guy that emerges as the tight end week in, week out that Freddie Kitchens can count on to produce as a pass catcher or as a blocker.
Yeah, and there's some other guys that are on the roster that could potentially end up being that guy. I mean, look, I think it comes from this group of four. I think personally, Jake Johnson is going to be a very big part of what they do. I think he will be the main starter for them. I think you are right, though, when it comes to that second tight end spot, because I do think Carolina is going to use a lot of 2 tight end looks. And when they do, who's going to be that guy there? I think you could see Cox at certain times during the year. I think he's going to be the guy that's going to start the year there, and they're hoping that he's going to emerge as that receiving tight end, that guy that's a threat down the middle of the field, cause issues down the seam. I think that's what you're hoping for from him. But if he's not that guy, then Shamar Easter may get his opportunity to show that he is that receiving threat, or Jordan Owens, who, will probably be out there, I think, at certain times when there are obvious run situations. So I'll be really interested to see how they sort of rotate everybody at in this position room. And then, as I mentioned, there's other guys here. There are other guys that, you never know how they could factor in. One name that's really interesting, Paul Barton, the son of former program legend Harris Barton. That's a guy, of course, that is very well known. If you remember, some of the great offensive linemen, Harris Barton is one of the first names that really comes to mind in Carolina history. And he's going to spend his graduate season with the football program after spending his pre-graduate career with the lacrosse program. This is not shocking. This is what Bill Belichick does. He's got a very close relationship with Joe Bresci, who is the head coach of the men's lacrosse team. And it makes sense that Carolina is going to have some of these guys on their team. Now, you go back to his high school playing career. He only played high school football as a freshman and a senior, and his best year was as a senior, which was during the COVID-shortened senior year, where he caught 25 passes for 336 yards and 4 touchdowns. For him, I think it's all about how quickly he progresses. This is someone that, because of his lacrosse background, we're going to be sort of obsessed with him, because we know that, go back to a guy like Chris Hogan, former lacrosse player that Belichick turned into a really good receiver, an effective receiver for Tom Brady and those New England teams at times late in Tom Brady's career in New England. This is going to be one of the things that we're going to be watching. Who is going to be that lacrosse player that could potentially turn into a star? Maybe this is the guy, but I do think it is probably going to take him a little bit of time to get up to speed, considering he hasn't played football all that much. And then some of the other guys in the room, 2 of them former walk-ons that are now on scholarship. That would be Deems May III and Court Halsey, who are both back for this year. And then the true freshman, Yasser Smith, the guy who was actually committed to Carolina as a defensive lineman. And then before they announced the numbers for this upcoming season, they had moved him to tight end. So a guy at 6'5", 265 pounds. Could be somebody that they could throw in there as a blocker at some point this year. But it will be interesting. He's a guy that, as far as I can tell, has not played on the offensive side of the ball. Definitely did in his senior year. Maybe he did at some other point in his high school career. But definitely an interesting move from Carolina there. So a lot of interesting guys at the bottom of the roster, but a lot of guys, I think, at the top of the roster that are unknowns, but could end up becoming stars for Carolina. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Regardless, we will have you covered all throughout the season on HeelToughBlog.com and all throughout the preseason. Tonight, after this edition of the show is over, the defensive line preview is going up. I know it's been a little bit since we put one of those up. I'm going to put one of those up tonight for you guys so that you can read it. I'll share it probably in the morning so that it'll get a little more run, but I will put it up for you guys that want to go in to the website, HeelToughBlog.com, and go ahead and read that as we preview the defensive line for the upcoming season. And again, that really is the perfect preparation for these podcasts. You get to read a little bit about those guys, and then we come on here on the podcast side of things and break them down a little further. So make sure you go back and read the other editions that we had so far. The offensive line is up, so make sure you go and read that before we do the offensive line preview, targeting Tuesday for that. But of course, we will let you guys know when we have a specific time for that. As I mentioned, tomorrow's edition of the podcast is going to be an exciting one because we are going to be talking about Amir Brown, the 2027 four-star commit for Carolina, but also going to be talking to a 2026 four-star commit in Trayshawn Ruffin on that edition of the podcast. So don't miss that. You're not going to want to miss that sit down that we did with him. It was really, really exciting. Glad to have him on the podcast. He was very excited to be on the podcast and everything like that. So that's a really cool interview that lets you guys see, into the minds of some of these recruits and their decisions and everything like that. So it'll be on the same places that you watched this edition of the podcast. So make sure you're there tomorrow night. Should be around the same time at 8:00 or so. But we'll keep you up to date, and I'll tweet that out when I have the time specifically that me and Zach will be on. So when it comes to the Four Corners podcast and the basketball side of things, Carolina, of course, did get another commitment out of the transfer portal in Ivan Matalkovich. So make sure you go back and check that out. Josh has the article up on the website. We have the podcast talking about him and what he'll bring to the table. Also, very interesting conversation about where Tyler Hansbrough ranked in the all-quarter century players list that was released just a couple of days ago. Might be about a week ago now. But make sure you guys go back and check that out for us. And then we are, of course, monitoring everything on the Luka Bogovac front. There is some new news that seems to be coming down here within the last couple of hours. And we're going to keep you up to date on everything that's going on with that. When he officially gets cleared, we will let you guys know that. So make sure you are tuning in to the website over there at HeelToughBlog.com. And as we've been pushing here on the podcast side of things, make sure you go to YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube page for us. That would greatly help us here as we're trying to push that page out a little bit. The other page is still important. Twitter and Facebook still very important, especially because you get the articles there as well. But the YouTube page, we do want to stress that to you guys to go there and subscribe. And if you like to watch the podcast, go watch it over there. That's a really cool way to get that experience in. So once again, that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.